And joining me right now is Eve Lorgen. How are you, Eve?
I'm good for a Sunday afternoon, and it's great to connect with you again. It's been a while. It's almost like a major trauma in the world right now with trying to keep up with everything, really. So I just do what I can, and stay focused on my own work with clients.
That's the only thing you can do. And of course, the last time we talked, Eve, the world was very different then.
Yeah, that was before the whole... We don't even want to talk about it, right? We don't have to mention that word.
Oh, I would just say it was COVID BC.
Yes.
Terrible. But yes, we won't even get into that here tonight, but I'm glad you're here. And of course, for those that don't know, Eve is the author of The Alien Love Bite and of course, The Dark Side of Cupid.
Yes.
Both great books, by the way. Very, very intriguing, very interesting, very thought-provoking.
Very much so. And they're still available in hard copy, but they're getting harder to find. And it still happens just as much today as it did when I wrote the books. So I just think it's something that does happen, and we just didn't really know about it clearly years ago. And now I think we have a more clear idea of what I call interdimensional handling and all the ways that these, some aliens and ETs and other beings can interact with us on unseen ways. Sometimes we don't know until later. So it's kind of unraveling all of that in our reality and becoming more and more aware of all these different influences.
That's right. And of course, America seems to be much more interested in the topic. Well, most of America seems to be into it. Not, I don't know. It's debatable. It seems like
South America. No, actually in Mexico and South America and France, and they're actually, I get sales. I look at the different countries, and actually in Mexico, there was quite some interest, and I would love to get it in Spanish one of these days, but it's not always easy to do it all kind of person.
Right.
So, yeah.
It just seems as of late, it's been very popular. You're seeing headlines about UFOs, and of course the government last year was pretty much filled with UFO news, and it seems like 2022 will be no different.
Well, I'm sure there's things being seen and observed, and the whole what they call the incoming trinary system. Some people call it the Nibiru, and the blue and red Kachina, and the other planetary bodies that orbit those two. And then they're starting to become seen in other videos and I guess photography. I don't know what you call it. Certain equipment in the northern regions, when people can see what's happening, they're actually very close.
Yeah.
There's efforts to hide those planetary bodies and those systems, which if we didn't have the technology and the chemtrails, and this is what they're saying, and the fake sun and the fake moon projector, we would have several eclipses throughout the day and even partially the night that eclipse out our own sun and moon based on where these bodies are moving around. And so I think that's why there's a lot of strange things happening with our weather and volcanoes. There's other influences,
I think you're right. We're seeing lots of strange weather patterns as we speak. Perhaps we'll see some pretty spectacular earth-shattering events this year, besides besides the war that might be kicking off this year as well.
Yeah. There's so much that it is overwhelming, and I think these kind of things happen. Like a lot of people who I worked with over the years have had, precognitive dreams, or they be shown things that happen in the future, and then testing and training scenarios, and we call these kind of milab alien kind of things, where they're shown these kind of things will happen in the future, and this is what you need to be prepared for. But I think there's different timelines and variations of what actually happens, because some maybe is yet to happen. And even this was written about in my Love Bite book, back in the year 2000, when some of the main characters in my book, whose stories, not just the Love Bite, but what they were shown by military and aliens about the future, and then the training that they would have to do when this civil unrest occurred, and when a bunch of different things happened, what to do and how they'd be trained for that time. So I think it's a lot unfolding now. But people say that there's different timelines, and that we may not be on the ones that we thought with all this Project Looking Glass, which I think they were using in a lot of these secret projects, and that they supposedly stopped using that technology. So they sometimes use psychics to tune in and to see.
Oh, yes. Like the Russians and the Germans, they all had their remote viewers they had.
Yes. Yes. It's funny how, we were just having that conversation with when they have done research with the secret space program survivors, where much of what they remember is connected to Nazi occult programs like Kruger and the Dark Fleet and some of these other things. And, some of the origin of these things, when they had to find information, I don't know if it was the Thule Society, and I'm not an expert on this history, but it ultimately came from people who were channeling these entities, and then these entities giving them specific instructions to build certain kinds of technologies. And then where did it go from there? And then I'm beginning to think that based on how many people seem to be remembering these 20 and back types of secret space program experiences, that they're either increasing their numbers in terms of the personnel they need for all these secret projects that have just kind of exploded, or that they're, whatever they're doing is not working with the memory, keeping the memories from coming up.
Yeah, it's very interesting, especially Jack Parsons, by the way, his whole connection with the occult and what he was able to accomplish.
Yeah, and that was way back, and he was with Crowley.
With Crowley, yeah.
Crowley and doing those, that's how they opened up supposedly the major portals in the, the Thelema Scarlet Woman tantric magic rituals that Aleister Crowley had done with the Book of the Law and that entity named Lamb who looked like an alien gray. Yeah. And so, this whole, and I remember James Bartley and I had several conversations about this, because in some of the alien abductions where there were a certain signature of experiences that involve sexual, a lot of times it's
sex magic,
assault, or sometimes it's not the assault, but they're activating, the sexual center and the Kundalini, and they're setting people up, or they might be, with a reptilian, and then amplifying their Kundalini and their abilities through these tantric ritual. They have streamlined the procedure,
Yes. And by the way, do you believe the archons are, let's say, demonic?
Well, the archons, I've read the Nag Hammadi library probably like 3 or 4 times and took notes, and, the pre-Nicene New Testament and the Bible. And, I've tried to study over and over and over again. So according to the Nag Hammadi, on the origin of the world and the reality of the rulers, the hypostasis of the archons, and a lot of these tractates in the Nag Hammadi describe them as lower archontic rulers that were created from an original divine being named Sophia, or Sophia, however you want to say it. But because she created a being without the consent of her consort, so it was almost like what would you call it, where a female just has her own child without the sperm of the donor or whatever. It's there's a name for that when you reproduce just from one sex or whatever. So anyway, that's the aborted fetus was Yalta-Baoth, who is the master archon of the whole thing. So Yalta-Baoth is a lot like, but I think it's a very grand being connected to Abraxas, the whole Abraxas figure. And it gets very complex, but the bottom line is that this being, according to the Nag Hammadi, had created many other angelic beings and lower archons, I think 365 or more, that were also, quote, angelic under that hierarchy, but they're a lower angelic type of form. And so a lot of the archons of the original Yalta-Baoth, I think when they would divide him up, like he split off from himself all these other beings, and that they took the form of, they always had like an animal head kind of archetypical appearance. And so I find it interesting, even from what they say in the Nag Hammadi, because in ancient Egypt, they had a lot of these gods that had, some kind of animal head, like the Anubis and like the cat-headed being, and the different ones with the bird, like the Horus Ra. So I think some of these lower archontic beings are from Yalta-Baoth, and they're playing out even as some of these aliens, like the Velon aliens.
Yes.
That Chris Thomas talked about, which he didn't get a lot of popularity. That I'm kind of going on a tangent here, but
That's okay.
I don't know if you have ever. And it was Miles Johnston I think he's from Ireland, but Chris Thomas was a Scottish healer and Akashic record reader, and he was very clairvoyant, and he was able to perceive behind the scenes and read the Akashic of the history of the earth and all these different, beings who came to invade and change and corrupt, pervert, infiltrate different religious systems, including the Anunnaki Sumerian myths. And so what he came to see, which I think I agree with him actually in a lot of this, is that there's this huge thing about, we're going to 5D. Is that right? We're ascending to 5D.
That's what they're saying, yes.
Yeah. Like when you look at, when he talked about, 5D, that's just, one dimension up from 4. That's not a big kahuna. We are actually much more multidimensional. So in a realization process that even the highest Buddhists describe, they're not popping over to 5D. Okay. They're not ascending to 5D. They're realizing their true nature, that we're actually dreaming this reality on a very, very lucid awareness. So I think what Chris Thomas kind of picked up on a lot of this, that there's a lot of con jobs going on by what I think are some of these lower archontic beings that were created of the 365 that Yaldabaoth has under him in this lower pleroma. There's like a higher pleroma and a lower pleroma, according to the Gnostic kind of understanding. And so the higher ones are the higher angelics that come from the eternal unbegotten, that is related to why Jesus Christ came here and what he came to help set straight and help heal these lower ones, So it's a long story, and it's very complex, the whole Nag Hammadi. I mean, so I try to make sense of it. It's like,
Yeah,
but I think it does connect with some of these aliens, though.
Yeah, the Anunnaki, Nephilim, the Archons. If you're religious, you would say, yes, these are demonic entities, and they're not exactly aliens. They're just sort of, they take on that sort of appearance to trick man. That's what some religious folks would say. Yes.
And really some of the descriptors that were given were that the Yaldabaoth and the ones who were under, quote, these archons, they were counterfeiters. They had a lot of like jealousy and envy, and they tend to want to counterfeit, hijack, pervert, subvert, and they have a vampirizing effect. I mean, when you look at their behaviors, it's somewhat psychopathic. So if you could read the signature of these beings and how they operate behind the scenes, then you could pick up on, okay, now I know what this is. And so this is why, even in my Dark Side of Cupid book, which was the second one that talked about where there was these unusual love obsessions or relationship manipulations or interferences, where there was a paranormal, third-party entity or an overshadowing or a possession, or just the sense that this was being directed from elsewhere with, emotional highs, crashing lows, paranormal activity, and the sense of vampirization. And so within that, when we looked at some of the personality styles of, let's say, one of the people in the love partnering, oftentimes the one who had the vampiristic qualities was one who had the more narcissistic personality style, but they were often hosted sometimes or possessed, but it wasn't always a full possession. It was kind of sometimes this entity that could take the form of a snake or a reptilian or even other forms would, possess here and there, or sometimes only during sex. So it wouldn't be a full-on possession, but there was enough of those qualities when someone could perceive it and the energy that this had a signature to it. So, and then when the question is, well, why are they vampirizing life force energy in the first place? Why do they need to do that? That was my question. If you wanted to define that which is not connected to the all that is this fountain of it's just a fountain of energy and love, and we're connected to God. We'll say the good, benevolent, all that is. We won't need to be hijacking and siphoning it off other people, right? I mean, that's how I see it. So when there's that vampirization kind of thing going on, there's something not connected that's not right. It ain't right. You know what I mean?
It's not. No, it's very dirty what they do. Interfering with the twin flame connection there.
Yes. And I think there are like certain connections that could be really powerful connections. And, maybe there is a true twin flame. And I think there is, but it's not as common as maybe what we would hope and what we think. But it's often used against us in some of these. Actually, they're more nefarious than just a simple human and human. sometimes it happens, and I've had reports of this a lot, where someone thinks they have a twin flame that's only operating on the astral realm, for example. And sometimes it's not necessarily associated with a human partner who's on the earth, but sometimes it is, but it's an entity that's acting kind of like on the behalf of a person that they haven't necessarily met or had a close, real intimate like relationship with. But it's more of like an obsession that they're having. And, but this entity is working through the image of, let's say, an entertainer or a famous person, or maybe it's just someone that they have an obsession with who's, like a astrologer or whatever, right? But there's an entity working behind that person's image, and very powerfully, sometimes with the awareness of the person. So this is when it gets really tricky and kind of weird. And I get a lot of reports of that where, it's not always fully cognizant. Is this person whose image is being used in the experiences that, let's say, the love bite reporter who's coming to me, is that person really aware of all the different interactions that are happening to the other person, like in the astral with these shared dreams and these weird synchronicities? And it corresponds often with social media posts that happen synchronistically right after they have one of these dream experiences where it's more real than just a dream. So that kind of thing happens a lot. And it's kind of weird, to be honest.
And do you think we see some of this play out in the media and in politics?
Oh, well, I've had reports from people who had what they think is a twin flame with a famous person, a very well-known person. And I think sometimes there is a true connection. So it's kind of spooky, but if, let's say, the person who's reporting it to me, very often what we find is that they are from a particular bloodline. Okay. And sometimes I don't want to put a spin on if it's a good or a bad, like an Illuminati bloodline, whatever.
Sure.
Some of them are people who, do they just have a quality because of their ancestry, their bloodline, their spirit, their frequency, and they are picked for some reason or another because of the frequency they give off or whatever that they have. And then others who are connected to certain obvious, let's say, Illuminati or powerful bloodlines are connecting with them in these other realities. Sometimes it's astral. Sometimes it's believed to be in another dimensional reality, like an abduction, like in the secret space program, where they take you and you're experiencing something, but it's not necessarily your physical body, but you come back as if it was. And so it depends on like what project you're in. So, but people in these Illuminati bloodlines often connect with others who are also of these bloodlines, but they're not famous. And sometimes they're people who are adopted and they have no idea that they're from a friggin' Rothschild bloodline, or something very connected to royalty, or some of these other ones where there's actually famous people who are in high positions are of that same bloodline. So they find themselves in these weird, twin flame dyads in the astral realm, and they have programming dreams, but they're not like a classic alien abductee, or they're not a classic secret space program kind of signature or clinical picture. So there's a lot of variations to this, but it is still very real, and it is, traumatic. A lot of it is traumatic.
Oh, yes. And this whole subject is very traumatic as well. I mean, this is one of the darker sort of, I guess you can say, darker topics of the whole UFO alien phenomenon, the abduction phenomenon. Not often do we hear about anything like a love bite, sort of scenario. Lots of strange things go hand in hand with this topic. That's why it's, one of those things you don't really hear too often about. And Eve, I must ask, when exactly was it when you realized you yourself might be in one of these experiences?
Gosh, well, that happened way back in heavens. It was probably in the mid to late 1990s. And there was more than one, actually. But that's actually what got me started to, and I was doing actually an abductee support group in Fallbrook, California, which is northern San Diego County, California. And then because I was always interested in the ufology and alien encounters and UFOs, because I knew that I had those kinds of experiences, but couldn't really get a lot of memory out of the things that I had where there was, one memory and then missing time or like, and I couldn't make sense of it, but I was very interested. So I did a lot of study and started talking with others and researching. But when I got together with others within a support group environment where we're just kind of chatting with each other informally and not just, let's say, reading literature or talking to the people who are, let's say, the UFO conferences who are giving lectures, we came to find out that we had a lot of unusual things that really weren't being focused on as relevant to the overall experience. And one of them was when we had like some kind of weird love obsession with another person who was also an abductee or who was chosen somehow by the aliens or could be the military in some cases who were interacting in our case would set us up with someone and then we would meet them later and all these powerful like deja vus and psychic, empathic connections, like completely telepathic connections. You're talking about a tantric telepathic connection, a profound soul immersion, even with the other individuals somehow that you've been, pre-bonded with. And then when you meet them, this is what happened to me is I remembered, like I had a flashback memory after I met this person and started having like this profound connection, of having been with him several times very intimately.
In a past life?
Like brings back these like amnesiac memories that are on this parallel compartmentalized part of yourself that was like maybe going on for years in this abduction program kind of thing. Yeah. And
Understood,
so,
yes.
Luckily, at that time, James Bartley, and he's a researcher, he's been around for quite a while, as long as I have. He was in contact with the late Dr. Karla Turner. In fact, we went to her last lecture in San Diego in 1995. It was by that time she knew she had breast cancer, and then she did die January of 1996, and it was a murder. Okay, her death was a murder, and it was known to be a murder, an extreme medical anomaly that was later found out, like in an autopsy by a doctor. And Barbara Bartholic had shared this information with us, like back in 2008 in an interview, and it's still on my website. So we know later that because of the things that Dr. Karla Turner talked about way back even in San Diego when she was invited to speak, James and I were like, wait a minute, I've had dreams of that. Like, oh my God, that's not a dream. That's that milab underground base, like weird alien, like processing plant stuff and all this other stuff that was kind of brushed under the carpet from other researchers because of the quote high strangeness of it, or they felt maybe it was just too taboo to talk about, or it didn't go along with the current theories of the strict, medical, examination, hybrid breeding program. They can only be, benevolent space brothers who are more advanced, or there was all these like ideas of what people thought that this phenomena is. But in reality, there was other things not being talked about. And as a woman, and somebody who's already has like a master's in counseling psychology and relationship dynamics, I'm like, wait a minute, this is really important. Why are they not bringing this up as something important enough to talk about it? I'm going to talk about this. Not only am I going to talk about this, but I'm going to talk about how these interference patterns happen once someone tries to get to the truth of their experiences consistently beyond a particular narrative of what they want us to have, and how there would be like spiritual warfare or the smoke and mirror kind of weird stuff, or they'd send somebody in your life to try to neutralize you who was some kind of spook from an alphabet soup agency, all that kind of stuff. So I wanted to talk about it and I wrote about it. And sure enough, I think it happens to many more than what even Bud Hopkins proclaimed in his book. In fact, I interviewed one of the gals that was part of his, he wrote a whole book on the Linda Neapolitano, Linda Cortile case and the Manhattan apartment abduction that was witnessed by 2 FBI agents and a VIP from like a foreign country, where this thing was a huge case with a lot of documented evidence where, she was floating through a window, in the sky in her nightgown and, up in a craft, and it was completely witnessed by these high level people. And so in her story, and it's rewritten in the Love Bite, just the part about what I wanted to put, the part about the Love Bite where she was actually connected and pre-bonded to this FBI agent who witnessed it and became obsessed with her. Right. So there was this whole love bite thingy going on in her case that, Bud did know about that. And he did know about other cases, but he seemed to think it wasn't it wasn't enough to really be reported. But in my cases, I found that at least, 30% of the people who were alien abductees or milabs who had that kind of experience. This was before we even knew about the 20 and back thing, by the way. So we didn't even call it that. In fact, I was the one who first came up with, when the Andy Parrow interview came up, I called it Project Superman, super warrior or super soldier. And then a lot of people started coming after that to talk about, well, I was in a super soldier program too. And he was like a Montauk boy. So anyway, this didn't happen until years later that people started catching on to these different terminologies. But anyway, I felt this is happening much more than what is really being reported or actually put together in the awareness of the individual. I think it takes a good amount of awareness of your own experiences. And then sometimes people just don't want to talk about it because like a lot of times they're married, right? So in many cases, they're married to someone and then they have this love bite set up with somebody else. And then they're tempted to have an affair. And sometimes they have an affair, but they don't want to talk about it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's terrible when that happens.
It's awful. It's like, or if you're married to someone who's not an abductee, and there's always the questions of like, why were you set up with them? And then you come to the awaken to your memories and then you can't relate, right? Because you had this whole secret life. And then they think you're nuts. And then if there's a divorce, then you can't talk about it or they're going to call you crazy and take the kids in a custody battle. So all these like kind of things happen behind the scenes. And that's why people don't really want to talk about, being set up with someone and, have sex. And oh my God, there's so many things that had happened. Like, I think James Bartley mentioned this. I just remembered it off the top of my head. It was an abduction by somebody who was in my book, in the Love By book, one of the men who had a love connection with somebody who was in my group. They both met. And then he had conscious memory of a lot of his alien contacts. And he was pro-alien according to his experiences because they were allowing him not only consciousness, but allowing him, they would bring him on craft. Like he even told my research partner this later, that he would be taken on board craft and be shown like a whole series of women on that craft who are like tranced out, who have been abducted, and that you can go and have sex with any of them. And that he felt like good about himself and they'd like pump his ego up about how they would let him do this if he would just kind of cooperate with them. So like little weird things like that you wouldn't hear from a regular like researcher. They're just going to like shove that thing under the rug.
Yeah, that's something you don't hear about at all. My God.
And that's why Barbie, like she had so many cases that still remain to this day, hidden. And I don't know what happened to them. And I was lucky enough to be able to have at least 3 of them in the dark side of Cupid. And they were the more diabolical ones that, people didn't really want to hear about that. They don't want to hear about the level of possession or malevolent things that make people afraid, that this should not happen. This should not happen to people. The kinds of things that she had reports of. So, but I reported them because I wanted to make a case about it.
Absolutely.
So that there was connections between things that others weren't putting together. They thought it might be anecdotal, but not. They are connected. So.
And Eve,
popular.
And Eve, yeah. And Eve, I must ask, after getting your master's degree in counseling and psychology, has this sort of maybe helped or not helped you very much in your career? After, let's say, random people sort of find out you're into this sort of thing, has that ever hindered your career in any way?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like, in fact, I had a very good mentor in the program that I was at, and he was also a Buddhist at the time, and he was a very, very good therapist. And he was a specialist in post-traumatic stress disorder and, all kinds of things. But he had a genuine gift of real compassion and was able to do work with people that was phenomenal. So we worked together. He was my mentor and also my own therapist, and he helped actually give a referral to me to a place where I wanted to, like what you have to do in Southern California anyway, get a number of hours of clinical experience before you have enough to take a test for the state licensure for marriage and family counseling. So I was in the process because I had my son. He was born in 1992. And so I had to stop, and I was a full-time mom for a while until I wanted to get back to complete the hours, right, to take the test for the state of California. So in the process of doing that, you have to have a referral, and it's kind of hard to do because a lot of these places won't want to hire you because of this tax thing or whatever it was. But so anyway, so I worked free of charge, by the way. You work to get experience at a hospice place, and it was for bereavement counseling for people who had family members in hospice.
Oh my.
So, it was good experience from the perspective of bereavement therapy with people who, are losing a loved one to cancer and going through that process, and people willing to train under supervision. And, it was fine. I learned a lot, but somebody in the bereavement center who was already like a social worker or whatever, she went and I guess found my name, that time. I should have used a different name for my book.
You should have, yes.
Yeah, I looked at it, but I didn't, right? So she go and looked me up on the internet and found out that I do anomalous trauma. And then it was all this like weird alien abduction shit, right? So, and it's not really weird. It's just, to them, it's not considered.
To normal folks.
Yeah. Yeah. So basically, she goes and tells my supervisor, who's a wonderful lady, and I'm not there talking all about aliens, right? I'm not trying to spam them with my alien love bite shit. All right. I'm not that kind of person. Right. So I'm being professional. I just want to learn about bereavement and learn what's in my profession. And so they went around and told the I guess the owner of the thing, I guess it was the owner who runs the thing. And then they're like, oh, I don't know, this would be bad for the company. They're afraid maybe they wouldn't get funding. So, they told me about it like, well, you got this referral that you specialize in, CPTSD. And, like, what's this alien stuff? I said, well, it is, PTSD. We didn't know about complex PTSD in those days, and now we do. And so, I defended myself, but I was so like upset. I quit. I quit like the next day or whatever. I'm like, I'm not going to put up with that shit. Okay. If they're going to be so friggin' mind controlled of their own, thing and be afraid they're not going to get funding because somebody who's working for them for free.
My God.
Has a thing, believes about aliens, so it's like, fuck them, right?
Yeah.
So
good for you, by the way.
I went through a divorce and I decided I'm leaving the state of California. I can't afford it anyway. So I just continued on in my own specialty, got several certificates in hypnotherapy, did my own studies in, codependency and individual counseling and group counseling. And I just do my own thing. And it's actually a blessing because I know people who, were involved with, Richard Boylan was a psychologist, like a clinical psychologist in the state of California. And many people who were, MF, marriage and family, who were under the state licensure, who were doing, let's say, anomalous trauma work or the ET stuff, or they got involved in the weird woo-woo stuff. Then a lot of times they ended up getting harassed or set up for, to be called names or to have their license taken away. And in fact, I know someone who's a really good therapist locally who worked with someone who was seriously, like a family was seriously abused by a primary narcissist, which was close to a psychopath. And I think she had also worked with some satanic ritual abuse victims as well. And as a therapist, you don't necessarily want to advertise that because when you do, you get attacked. I could tell you that. And so my therapist friend was actually attacked by the primary narcissist psychopath who wanted to, control, custody of his children. And she knew that he was basically a dangerous abuser and would fight for the wife and the children to keep them from having to be continually abused. And so he tried to take her license away and made it very, very difficult for her. So this is the kind of thing that happens with, I'm going on as a therapist when let's say you have a divorce case and you're counseling someone who has realized that they have a serious narcissist. That's why they're so seriously abused and the trauma is so severe. When we see people who have narcissistic personality disorder or even, borderline, the abuse and the harm done by the person in the family, it's very great trauma. And so a lot of narcissists, some of them are very well connected.
Yeah.
They could be overt narcissists. They could be overt. A lot of them are like high powered people who have a lot of money. They might be CEOs of major corporations. They might be like a 33rd degree Mason or whatever it is. So sometimes they have a lot of power within their own judicial controlling and manipulating because they have money. And then they try to destroy the therapist or destroy, the ex, right? To throw them into poverty or illness or whatever would kill them and then turn their children against them.
Yeah.
This kind of thing goes on all the time. And in fact, this has happened even within people who've had alien abduction things come to light and their partner, wasn't aware and wanted
they
to use
freaked
it
out.
against them.
Yeah.
Into custody. So a lot of that kind of happens. So to make a long story short, sometimes it is better to not be in the system. We know that better now, actually, even the medical system.
Now we know.
Not in the system. Well, they can't take your license away. They could name call you. They could smear campaign you. They can do a lot of stuff.
So they can't have your license revoked, in other words.
Exactly. Okay. So sometimes now, in retrospect, I think it is much better that you steer out of the system. You be a little bit more independent.
I see.
And you do your own thing. And as long as you stand in integrity to the best of your ability, that's the best you can do. But now, now with post-COVID, there's a lot of medical people who are being forced to go against the Hippocratic Oath and violate Nuremberg codes. Okay.
Yes.
So who wants to be a part of that system?
Yeah, no one.
Yeah.
By the way, Eve, this is kind of personal. I hope you don't get angry for me even bringing it up, but